Now this piece, being poor, became an internet sensation years ago when it was first published. Being poor is knowing exactly how much everything costs. Being poor is getting angry at your kids for asking for all the stuff they see in TV commercials. Being poor is having to buy an $800 car because that's what you can afford. And then having the cars break down on you because there's not an $800 car in America that's worth a damn. Being poor is hoping the toothache goes away. Being poor is knowing your kids go to their friends' houses, but never will the friends come over to yours. Being poor is going to the restroom before you get in the school lunch line, so your friends will be ahead of you and will never hear you say, "I get a free lunch," when you go to the cashier. Being poor is living next to the freeway. Being poor is coming back to the car with your children in the back seat, clutching that box of Raisin Bran you just bought, and trying to think of a way to make the kids understand that that box has to last. Being poor is wondering if your well-off sibling is lying when he says he doesn't mind when you ask for help. Being poor is off-brand toys. Being poor is a heater in only one room of the house. Being poor is hoping your kids don't have a growth spurt. Being poor is stealing meat from the store, frying it up before your mom gets home, and telling her she doesn't have to make dinner tonight because you're not hungry anyway. Being poor is Goodwill underwear. Being poor is not enough space for everyone who lives with you. Being poor is feeling the glued soles tear off your supermarket shoes when you run around the playground. Being poor is your kid's school being the one with the 15-year-old textbooks and no air conditioning. Being poor is thinking $8 an hour is really a good deal. Being poor is relying on people who don't give a damn about you. Being poor is an overnight shift under fluorescent lights. Being poor is finding the letter your mom wrote to your dad, begging him for the child's support. Being poor is stopping the car to take a lamp from a stranger's trash. Being poor is making lunch for your kid when a cockroach skitters over the bread and you're looking over to see if your kid saw it. Being poor is believing a GED actually makes a goddamn difference. Being poor is people angry at you for just walking around in the mall. Being poor is the police busting into the apartment right next to yours. Being poor is not talking to that girl because she'll probably just laugh at your clothes. Being poor is hoping you'll be invited for dinner. Being poor is a sidewalk with lots of brown glass on it. Being poor is people thinking they know something about you by the way you talk. Being poor is really needing that 35-cent raise. Being poor is your kid's teacher assuming you don't have any books in your home. Being poor is $6 short on the utility bill, and there's no way to close that gap. Being poor is crying when you drop the mac and cheese on the floor. Being poor is knowing you work as hard as anyone, anywhere. Being poor is people surprised to discover you're not actually stupid. Being poor is people surprised to discover you're not actually lazy. Being poor is a 6-hour wait in an emergency room with a sick child asleep on your lap. Being poor is never buying anything someone else hasn't bought first. Being poor is picking the 10 cents ramen instead of 12 cents ramen because there's 2 extra packages for every $1. Being poor is having to live with choices you didn't know you made when you were 14 years old. Being poor is tired of people wanting you to be grateful. Being poor is knowing you're being judged. Being poor is a box of crayons and a $1 coloring book from a community center Santa. Being poor is checking the coin return slot on every soda machine you go by. Being poor is deciding it's all right to base a relationship on shelter. Being poor is hoping the register lady will spot you the dime you owe them. Being poor is feeling helpless when your child makes the same mistakes you did and won't listen to beg them against doing so. Being poor is making sure you don't spill on the couch just in case you have to give it back before the lease is up. Being poor is 4 years of night classes for an Associates of Art degree. Being poor is knowing where the shelter is. Being poor is people who've never been poor wondering why you chose to be so. Being poor is knowing how hard it is to stop being poor. Being poor is seeing how few options you have. Being poor is running in place. And being poor is people wondering, why didn't you leave? Now I share with you now a meditation. Being poor in this country is to be looked down upon, as if poverty is the person's fault. We who have pulled ourselves out of poverty think that everyone should be like this. But for many, they never get out of that hole. So I invite you to consider your own thoughts on what it means to be poor in a spirit of silence.
Everybody take a deep breath. It's a pretty powerful reading, and we've got 3 more for you to consider. This one is Letters After My Name by Carrie Kopnick, a Unitarian Universalist. And Sean has noted here, Carrie was a DRE and activist in the Orange County area for years. She wrote this about her experience. I pull another basket of steaming dishes out of the dishwasher in our church basement. My partner in kitchen cleanup grabs a clean dish towel to dab the pools of water from the upturned soup bowls. They ask, "So what's your undergraduate degree in?" The conversations that happen in church kitchens are absolute favorites of mine. I've been washing dishes in church basements since I was 11 years old. Kitchen ministry fills my heart, but not this time, not this conversation. I know the look I'll get. I know they won't mean harm, but I can feel the shame creep from my heart to my face. I am staff here. They pay me a chunk from their operating budget to direct the ministry to and with their children and teens. Surely I have a degree, preferably a master's degree, likely even a professional license of some kind. But I respond, actually I don't have a degree. I didn't finish my undergrad. I turn to load the next round of soup bowls. And while I want to say I was close to a degree in child psych, and if I move back to that state, I'll finish up, but I just spray the bowls with a restaurant-style sprayer. Bits of barley and carrots fly everywhere. The conversation stops. My eyes don't linger to see the raised eyebrows, the quick flash of judgment. It's not that I didn't want to finish school. I just came from a working-class family where college visits and choosing the right school were a foreign world. My high school teachers didn't see anything special in me. My brain functions more like a modern dance number done in the woods upside down than a neat and tidy ballet performance of Swan Lake. So I tumbled out of high school and headed where my friends went, to a big public research institution that was all about third position of ballet with absolutely no woods involved. It's not surprising I left early, feeling stupid. I worked in what could have been the Ms. Magazine top 10 low-wage jobs for women until my Unitarian Universalist congregation needed a religious educator and I applied. We were wildly successful, doubling the number of registered children and then doubling again. We won an award for growth and innovation and finally had to buy a church building to house our booming congregation. I served on district and continental boards for my professional association, and my blog was often featured in the denominational magazine. But I never applied to be formally credentialed. How could I? I would have to face the credentialing committee without any letters after my name. My faith says all are welcome. My faith says we are all whole and holy and good. I myself have said this to dozens of children and teens, and yet we have miles to go to make this so. So our meditation on this particular reading at this time, I'd like for you to think about this statement. Classism is about more than income or the way we speak, but it is also about how we treat those with more or less education. I invite you to consider these words in a spirit of silence.
Well, this next reading is from James Wallace. Jim Wallace is a liberal Christian social activist and a writer, and he tells a story about his first year in seminary. He became a member of what they called a small group of activist evangelical seminarians who found that the Bible contains several thousand verses on the poor and God's response to injustice. Now, what surprised them most, however, was that the subject had never been discussed in their various churches where they'd grown up. Never discussed. In the Bible, he writes, the poor were everywhere, yet the subject was not to be found in our churches. Here is his account of their discovery. One member of our group took an old Bible and a new pair of scissors and began a long process of literally cutting out every single biblical text about the poor. It took him a very long time. The prophets were simply decimated when he got to the resounding command of Amos to let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. He just cut it out. when he found God speaking through Isaiah to say, "It is not the fast that I chose to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, and let the oppressed go free." He just cut it out. When he discovered the summation of God's call to Micah to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God, he just cut it out. He cut almost everything from the Hebrew prophets who had to say about nations and rulers, and all of us are instructed to treat the poor. How to treat the poor. Much of the Psalms also disappeared, where God is seen as the defender and deliverer of the oppressed. And all the references to the Hebrew tradition of Jubilee had to be cut, where from Leviticus onward, the practice of the periodical leveling was lifted up as crucial to the health of society. Slaves were to be set free, debts were to be canceled, and land redistributed to its rightful owners. Well, it was all too dangerous to remain in the Bible. And when he got to the New Testament, the seminarian with the scissors had a lot of work to do. He began with a thankful prayer of a simple peasant woman who would bear the new Messiah. Mary's famous Magnificat prophesied the meaning of the coming of Jesus. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Because Mary didn't sound like a religious service provider with a faith-based federal grant, but instead like a social revolutionary, her prayer had to be cut. Then there was Jesus' first sermon at Nazareth, his Nazareth Manifesto, where he announced his messianic vocation. Harkening back to Isaiah, Jesus proclaimed his own mission statement by saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Because all the scholars agree Jesus is talking about that Jubilee thing again, this was a mission statement that had to be cut before it reached committee. And Wallace continues. Jesus and his Sermon on the Mount, and especially the Beatitudes, threatened to turn the world, as we know it, upside down by saying, in his kingdom, the blessed ones are the poor, the meek, the merciful, the peacemakers, the persecuted, the ones who hunger and thirst for justice. They clearly had to go. And the account of how the early church began to practice economic sharing, after the Spirit landed on them, would be pretty incredulous to churches today. So with the totally unrealistic assertion that there is not a needy person among them. Even if Paul was encouraging economic redistribution as a sign of fellowship wherever he went. Snip, snip, snip. All the stuff from John about not having the love of God unless you open your heart to the needy just doesn't apply to some of our most important and pious church leaders, not to mention our television evangelists. And the idea from James that faith without works is dead was dangerously close to the social gospel. So some more cuts were in order. What does Wallace do with that Bible now? He says he takes that damaged Bible when he speaks, and he holds it up and says, "Brothers and sisters, this is our American Bible. It is full of holes." So for the meditation, what are the ways that we, as Unitarian Universalists, keep people from being included in our congregations who are poor? How might we live out the wisdom of the Bible to tell us to take care of those in need? So I invite you into a time of silence before we end the service with our final hymn. The Spirit of Silence.
next reading is The Kindness of Lo Mein by Karen Solvig Anderson. My friend Marcy and her boyfriend Brian recently ate at a local Chinese restaurant. As they enjoyed a plate of lo mein, engrossed in conversation, a hand reached out and ushered away their plate of noodles. A quick voice and agitated mumble, "Sorry," and a thin, poorly dressed woman left the restaurant with not only herself, but their plate of lo mein. In astonishment, they watched her walk down the street, holding the plate with the flat of her hand as she stuffed noodles into her mouth, slapping sharply against her face. The owner of the restaurant realized what had happened and darted out the front door, chasing after the noodle thief. He stood firmly in front of her, blocking her way and grabbing a side of the plate. A struggle ensued. Noodles slid uneasily from one side to the other, slopping over the edge. He surged forward and pulled with a heroic, strong-arm attempt to retrieve his plate. The woman's fingers slid from the plate. Noodles flew, then flopped pathetically on the sidewalk. Left empty-handed with soggy, contaminated noodles at her feet, the woman stood with arms hung dejectedly at her side. The owner walked victoriously back to the restaurant with the soiled plate in hand. My friends were given a new heaping plate of lo mein, although they had already consumed half of the stolen plate. A stream of apology in Chinese came from the proprietor. Unable to eat anymore, they asked to have the noodles wrapped and set off to see the movie they had planned to see. A block later, they happened upon the lo mein thief. The woman was hypercharged. She simultaneously cried, convulsed, and shouted at a man who rapidly retreated from her side. My friend, unsure about what to do, listened to her boyfriend's plea to just walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she walked over to the noodle thief and said, "We haven't formally met, but about 10 minutes ago you were interested in our noodles. They gave us some new ones. Are you still hungry?" The woman nodded and extended her bony arms. She took the styrofoam container in her hands, bowed ever so slightly, and murmured, "Thank you, you're very kind." What makes us walk away from discomfort or stay? You could say a lot about my friend's story, a lot about generosity, kindness, attention, and thievery. I'm more interested in what motivates us to confront that which makes us uncomfortable, not only you, but myself, and makes us look at the guts and grit of decisions, the choices to not address things that are uncomfortable, uneasy, unbalanced, unnatural, unbelievable. When our foundations start to shake, we can feel the tremors move up our legs and into our torsos, and we want more than anything to make it stop, anyhow, any way. My friend Marcy could feel herself shake. I know because she told me so. But she chose not to walk away. She dealt with uncomfortableness. She held firm in the muck. Sometimes that's all we need or can do to get to the other side, the side where generosity, comfort, and kindness reside, the side where foundations are firm and stable, where one shaking walks back to the other side. So I'd like for you to take a few minutes and think about what might you have done if someone stole the food off your table at a restaurant. What do you think of the friend's response? I invite you to consider the story in a spirit of silence. As you go forth today, I invite you to consider the following. Consider how you spend your money. Try even for a day, a week, or a month to feel what it might be like to be living on the margins. Go about your day without even having change in your pocket. No ATM card. No cell phone. Oh my goodness. No email at home. Don't buy a cup of coffee. Eat out of your home at a restaurant. Rely on others for a ride to work or to the grocery store. Then give the money you save to an organization that fights for economic justice. If you don't already, consider getting into relationship with people outside your comfort zone. For example, visit a homeless shelter or serve food to the poor. And I know many of you are involved in nonprofits here in Orange County that would fit that challenge. Our theological heritage as Unitarian Universalists calls us to justice. As a denomination, however, we do not encounter many of the poor or homeless. We do not know them and they do not know us. When we begin to meet together and tell our stories, our work will begin. May it be so. Amen.